You ever wonder how belief systems that are literally thousands of years old can help us navigate the total chaos of the 21st century? Well, today we're going to dive into how two of the world's biggest faiths, Christianity and Islam, give us these frameworks for tackling some of the biggest questions in our lives. I mean, think about it. Love, war, life, death. From who we fall in love with to how we value life itself, these faiths offer guidance that has shaped entire civilizations. But the big question is, how well do those ancient answers actually hold up today? That's what we're going to explore. So let's start with something every single one of us deals with: love. How do these ancient faiths guide us through the modern maze of relationships, sex, and family? What's really fascinating right off the bat is the foundational difference. In Christianity, marriage is seen as this divine covenant, a sacred promise made directly to God. But in Islam, it's framed more like a social contract, an agreement that's meant to unite families and really help a couple grow on their spiritual journey together. Now, this is where things get incredibly complex, right? The topic of same-sex relationships. Traditionally, a central objection in both faiths was that these relationships couldn't lead to procreation. But, as society changes, so do interpretations. Within some Christian circles, for example, there's this growing focus on compassion, on not judging, with some people suggesting a relationship isn't sinful as long as it stays chaste. And this is a line you hear a lot. It's from the book of Leviticus, and it's probably one of the most cited scriptures in debates about homosexuality. For folks who hold a traditional view, it's pretty direct, and it's definitely shaped religious law for centuries. But then, on the flip side, you have this core teaching from Jesus himself. This simple command, do not judge, is what many other Christians use to argue for a more accepting, more compassionate stance. And that creates this really powerful theological tension. Of course, relationships are complicated, and sometimes, they end. So what do these faiths have to say about the painful reality of divorce? And yeah, you guessed it, the approaches are pretty different here too. The Catholic Church, for instance, has traditionally viewed marriage as an unbreakable sacrament. Islam, on the other hand, does permit divorce, but there's a saying from the Prophet Muhammad, a hadith, that calls it the most hateful of permissible things to Allah. So it's allowed, but it's really seen as a last resort, with a whole process that includes a waiting period just to encourage people to try and reconcile. Okay, let's shift gears a bit. We're moving from the life we build with other people to the value of life itself. We're going to look at ideas about creation, abortion, and, the end of life. Before we dive in, we have to understand this one absolutely crucial concept: the sanctity of life. This is the bedrock belief in both faiths. It's the idea that life is a sacred gift from God, and because of that, only God has the ultimate authority to give it or to take it away. For Christians, this value starts right at the very beginning. The Genesis story describes this very deliberate, step-by-step creation, and it all culminates with God making humans in his image, and then personally breathing life into the first man, Adam. And this leads to a really interesting tension in humanity's role. On one hand, you have stewardship, this call to be gentle caretakers of God's creation, but on the other hand, you have dominion, the idea that God gave humans authority over the earth. Figuring out how to balance those two, that's a constant debate. So naturally, this brings us to one of the most contentious issues today: abortion. And the views are way more nuanced than you might think. While that sanctity of life idea is central, both faiths have these deep theological debates around exceptions, like in cases of rape. What's also really interesting is that Islam specifically forbids abortion for financial reasons, and that's based on this deep belief that Allah will provide. Okay, so we've talked about personal ethics. Now let's zoom way out to the huge societal issues of war and peace. When, if ever, is it actually right to fight? To grapple with this, Christianity developed what's known as the just war theory. Now, this isn't some blank check for conflict, not at all. It's more like a super strict moral checklist. For a war to be just, it has to have a righteous cause, it has to be the absolute last resort, use proportional force, and have peace as its ultimate goal. Islam also has its own detailed conditions for conflict, which are often discussed under the really complex concept of jihad, and that also heavily restricts when and how fighting is allowed. You've definitely heard this phrase before, right? An eye for an eye. It comes from the Old Testament, and it's really the foundation of what we call retributive justice. The basic idea is that the punishment should fit the crime. In the context of war, it's often been used to justify proportional retaliation. But then you get this, which is in direct opposition to that:
Jesus' command to turn the other cheek is this radical call for pacifism, for non-retaliation. It's a call to absorb violence rather than return it. This very contrast is at the heart of Christian debates about war.
So here is the crucial point, and this is so important. While there are these complex frameworks for when war might be justified, both religions are absolutely crystal clear in their condemnation of terrorism. The intentional killing of innocent civilians is seen as a profound sin against God. Period. All right, for our final section, let's look at what happens after the conflict, after the crime. How should justice be served? What's the point of punishment? And is there any room left for forgiveness? So what's the ultimate goal of punishment, really? Is it retribution, just getting your own back? Is it deterrence, scaring other people from doing the same thing? Or is it reformation, actually trying to change someone for the better? As we'll see, these religious traditions often put a lot of emphasis on that last one. This whole conflict just comes to a head with the death penalty. It's fascinating, because scripture is used to argue both for and against it. People for it will often cite an eye for an eye as a mandate for ultimate justice, but opponents will point right back to thou shalt not kill and the sanctity of life, arguing that a state-sanctioned killing is just vengeance, not real justice. And at the absolute heart of the Christian faith is this incredibly powerful moment. While he is literally being executed, Jesus asks God to forgive the people responsible. It's held up as the ultimate example of grace and forgiveness, even in the face of unimaginable suffering. And this teaching just reinforces that same idea. When he was asked how many times you should forgive someone, Jesus' answer, 70 times 7, wasn't a literal number. It was a metaphor. It meant your forgiveness should be limitless, continuous. It's a pretty radical call to just let go of vengeance. So, where does all this leave us? We've seen how these ancient faiths provide some really detailed but also sometimes contradictory guidance. In our complex modern world, do these rules actually give us a clear moral compass to follow? Or do the endless debates over how to interpret them sometimes create even more conflict than they solve? That's a question worth thinking about.